Hello and welcome to our first ENABL workshop for 2024. I am Joanna McCrae, the D&I Client Solutions Director at Page Group and one of the founders of the ENABL network and your host for this evening. As a bit of a reminder, we created the ENABL group to develop a community of Asian, brown and black leaders who have perhaps not had the best sort of experience in the D&I space. A large part of our programme is to demystify some of the NED journey for people, and we're going to do that today because we've got three established NEDs with us who hopefully will share their journeys and their learnings on the way, and also give us a bit of an insight to some of the highs and lows of becoming a NED. But before we start, I wanted to introduce the panel. So, hi panel.
Hiya. Evening.
Thank you for joining us. Could you introduce yourselves for us, please? Sanjeev, would you like to start?
Yeah. Evening, everyone. I'm Sanjeev Sharma. I'm the Chief Property Portfolio Officer at M&G Real Estate. This is my full-time exec role. As my bio sort of states, I manage on behalf of M&G about 37 billion of property assets across 29 countries. In addition, in terms of my non-exec roles, these are split into paid and non-paid. So the non-paid bit, I'm on the Estate Strategy Committee of King's College University London. I'm on the Prudential Staff Charitable Trust, and I'm also on the patrons group of an organisation called Real Estate Balance, which is trying to drive gender and race equality in the real estate sector. In terms of my paid role, because I am an executive, I'm only allowed one paid role, and I am a board director on a FTSE 250 company, listed company called Derwent London. I sit on the audit, risk, nominations, and shortly will be chairing the REMCO as well. That's me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Marnie.
Yes, I'm Marnie Millard. I'm now a portfolio non-exec director. So I have 4 live roles. I chair the board at University Academy 92, which is based in Trafford. That's a joint venture between the class of 92 and Lancaster University. And we're there to make education accessible to all. I chair the board at Marks Electrical PLC. We floated Marks Electrical in November 21. That's an online electrical retailer. I chair the board at Pura, which is a B Corp eco-friendly baby brand. And then finally, I'm a non-exec director at Beaver, which is a very nice high-end cordial. Up until November last year, I was also a non-exec director for Finsbury Food Group, and I chaired the REMCO there. And my last exec role, which I stood down from in December 2020, was as chief executive for Nichols PLC, better known as the home of Vimto.
Thank you so much. And finally, Jason.
Thank you, Jo. So good afternoon, everybody. Jason Sahota. I'm up here in the Midlands. So just by way of quick introduction, I've spent 25 years in tech in some shape or form, doing various interesting things in my career. I would describe myself as a portfolio non-exec now. The current roles I hold are, one is chair for a data and AI company where we're playing around with machine learning and generative AI in the public sector. So it's for social good as well as us making a profit. The second one is a technology-enabled property business with online auctions, which we're just launching a new product in the residential space. So anybody who wants to sell a house, look us up. We're going to give you a brand new experience. And the third one, which is a bit off the wall, is an AI grill company, which is a startup, which won the CES Innovation Award this year, actually this month, when in Vegas, and that's using AI technology to optimally cook your steak, chicken, pizza in the most optimal possible way, just to kind of show you how technology has moved in the world. Outside of that, I'm also doing some stuff on a pro bono basis around technology in the West Midlands and promoting it. I do some mentoring to startups, partly in the creative industry, but more the wider tech industry, and 2 other businesses that I'm currently looking at as well, which I might take on a chair role in the near future. So that's a little bit about me. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you so much. So I told you we had some established NEDs this evening. So hopefully that won't prevent you from asking so many questions and getting a really good sense of what the NED journey is like. Just a quick reminder, we're going to be recording this session. And so please, the reason I stress that is we want you to still ask questions. We want you to get as much as you can out of the session. The recording will only be shared with people who have registered as part of the ENABL network. So if you are unhappy with that or unsure about that, then please reach out to us and let us know. As this is a round table, if you have any questions or would like to share any of your thoughts, please use the question and answer function that you can see at the top of your screens. My colleagues Aaron and Catherine will be managing that throughout today's session. So let's get started. Now, I don't know who's in the room today, but one of the first questions I thought was really important, a little bit obvious to start the session with was, and I'm going to ask you, Jason, around this. What does a NED actually do? Because I think there's a few people are unsure.
Yeah, no, look, it's a really good question. And, you know, if I'm really honest with myself, I'm not sure I knew that 10 years ago. The first thing that I would say is a NED, there are certain common elements of being a non-exec wherever you do it, whether you're doing it in a non-for-profit, whether you're doing it in a PLC, or whether you're doing it in a startup. However, I do think there are different skills required when you're doing different roles in different types of organizations.
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is the experience that sitting on a PLC board, which is a listed company, comes with a lot of different responsibilities than if you're working in a pre-Series A startup business where you have to kind of roll your sleeves up a little bit more. But there are common things in all of these things. And for me, it kind of boils down to 2 or 3 things. One is that you are there to challenge and support the management team, whoever that is, all founders, depending on the nature of the business. The second thing is mentoring and coaching, which kind of ties to the first one, but I want to call it out because I think it's a really important skill in terms of working with the team. And again, depending on how big the organization is, non-execs are often paired off with executive team members to support and coach them. And the third thing is really have a good understanding of the business. Now, most people will specialize something in their career before they become a non-exec. When you're a non-exec, you've got to start learning about the whole business and you've got to contribute to the whole business. So, you know, I have a background in technology. Doesn't mean I just talk about technology. I've got to talk about the financials. I've got to talk about the people. I've got to talk about sales. I've got to talk about all of those things. So, you know, I'd encompass it that. And my final point really is no non-exec role is the same and no non-exec role's day is the same. I don't think I've ever met any of my peer group anywhere that we could all sit down and say we have exactly the same role.
Yeah. Thank you so much for making that clearer. I'm really interested then on what actually drove you to become a NED, and I'm going to ask Marnie, what drove you to become a NED and why did you see that as a potential?
Yeah, well, I think Jason's made a really pertinent point. I think to embark on a NED career, you have to be really, really curious, coming back to his point about wanting to understand a different business, because ostensibly, even if you're in the same sector, as Jason said, every business can be different, and that's predominantly driven by different people within different organisations. So you've got to be curious. You have got to be really, really comfortable in that support, mentoring, coaching space. And you've also really got to establish when you are embarking on a NED career, whether you are really, really comfortable sitting on a bus, but you're not necessarily sitting in the driving seat. You're helping with the directions, you're reading the map, you're looking at alternative routes, and you're very, very supportive, but you are not driving the bus. And I think when I did my first NED role, and I suspect this might be a little bit of insight for everybody who's joined us this evening, getting your first one under your belt is really important. One, it's not straightforward, and I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, but you also need to establish whether it's right for you, because I have met a number of chief executives or C-suite leaders who thought they would like to be a non-exec director and then just got highly frustrated, really not fulfilled by not being in charge, so to speak, and deciding, that it's not for them. I'm by nature very collegiate. I love working in a great team. I don't feel the need to wave my flag, even when I was an executive. So in terms of me as an individual, I really like that space of support, mentoring and coaching. So that felt a natural progression for me in particular, Jo.
That's interesting, because you've both mentioned that mentoring and coaching element. So it's obviously not a role of tell and get too involved. And I love your analogy of driving the bus. Jason, because it would be interesting to hear from you, because you, like you said, initially when it was proposed to you, you didn't know what it entailed. So what drove you then to become one?
Look, if I'm completely honest, right, I built a business, I sold the business, I took some time off, and I wasn't quite sure what to do. So, it seemed like a sensible thing to do, but it was probably about 14 months after thinking about what I wanted to do that I kind of decided having a non-exec career is a good thing for me. I think Marnie was spot on. Getting that first role really does give you an insight. I remember a lot of people telling me what a non-exec role was. I can tell you now, having experienced it, some of it was true, some of it isn't true. And I think the experience is different for everybody.
Yeah.
I don't think being a non-exec is for everybody. The two things that really pushed me, I think my natural leadership style was a very supporting, coaching one anyway. Yeah. So when I was a CEO and the founder, I tended to, that was my style. So that kind of came naturally. I'm an ex-consultant from KPMG. The consulting skill set, I was quite happy advising or not driving the bus at times. And I was quite happy to drive the bus. Yeah. But actually, the last piece is when you give those little nuggets of information, I had a couple of great examples this week, which sometimes we take for granted when you come from an exec career. And it has such an impact on the individual and the business. It's really rewarding. It gives you that nice warm feeling inside. And it's that warm feeling inside, which is why I do what I'm doing.
Lovely. Thank you so much. I mean, this evening, our aim is to really give the audience a true picture of what to expect when becoming a NED. So how did you get your first role? And can you share any anecdotal stories on some of the highs, but also we want to know some of the lows as well with that initial stage of becoming a NED? And Sanjeev, do you want to start that for me?
Yeah, it's not easy, let's put it that way, particularly because my experience is mainly in the listed space. So being a non-exec director in a FTSE 250, it's a very regimented and almost regulated sort of process, if you like. So my sort of starting point was I went on a program which was triggered by the Parker Review. So the Parker Review was about, must have been about 7-8 years ago now. So this was driven by the lack of diversity on listed companies. And basically the Parker Review came up with this sort of 1 by 21. So the FTSE 100 had to have one person from a BAME background on a FTSE 100. And I think it was one on a FTSE 250 by 2024. So that sort of spurred me on. And I went on a program through Deloitte's actually, because they ran this program for people from a Black Asian minority background. And basically what they did was they prepared you in terms of understanding what it meant to be an NED. So what are the typical committees in a company? Nominations, audit, Remco, risk. What do they do? What do they not do? So I went through that program. And then coming to your question in terms of how you get your first job, and no disrespect to the Page Group, but if you're a listed company...
Don't say it then, Sanjeev.
Yeah, I'll say it. So if you're a listed company, they are very mindful of not being accused of going through the old boys network.
Yeah.
So just tapping someone on the shoulder. So what they tend to do is run a full recruitment process through the nominations committee typically, and they tend to use the SHREC firms. So SHREC is the acronym. I'm not sure if people have come across them, for the 5 big non-exec firms out there. So Spencer Stewart, Heidrick and Struggles, Russell Reynolds, Egon Zehnder and Korn Ferry. So I went through all of those. I have to say, you have to kiss a lot of frogs to actually succeed. But once you're on their radar with a specific skill set they're looking for, and understanding what you can bring. And again, picking up on Marnie's point, because I've got the real estate experience and quite broadly, that sector experience held me in good stead. Yeah. The fact I'm a very curious individual as well. So again, Marnie mentioned that as a non-exec, you have to be curious. And we've just seen with Fujitsu Post Office, where perhaps non-exec directors haven't been curious enough. And again, I think just using Marnie's analogy of the bus, you have to be a backseat driver. You're not just a passenger. So you've got to be inquisitive, ask the questions and so forth. And because I'm of that nature, I think that helped. But it's not easy. It took me 3 years to get my first non-exec position. But you've got to be ready and show what you bring compared to everyone else on the long list.
I'm going to push you a little bit on that. What was the low? Was it the kissing the frogs? But probably not.
Yeah.
But what was it like then when you finally sort of get that position? That was the bit. What was the low part? Is it because it's so you're over, there's so much information that you're given and you've still got your day job because that's the situation you're in? I'd just like to know a little bit about that.
The lows, probably 2 or 3 things. So one is, you don't want to be the candidate who's from a BAME background on the long list just because you are BAME, and therefore you turn up for, and this was during COVID, primarily on a Teams call, and you realize there's no way you're suited because, for example, they're looking for someone with a digital background, and I don't have digital, but they can tick the box to say we put someone from a BAME background on the long list. So there's a bit of shifting you have to do yourself and sometimes say no. So it's always difficult. So you have to be careful. You're in control. So do that. Secondly, the process, interview process, is quite complex, particularly for a FTSE 250. So you meet the chairman, you meet someone else from the nominations committee. You then go through a second round with the rest of the executive committee, the executive directors on the board, and then the non-executive directors as well. Right. And then what happens is typically the headhunter will do a lot of due diligence on you with your colleagues, because really they don't know who I am until they ask others, my peers. So the whole process can take 6 months. It's not a quick process because you have to get it right. The worst thing is you get someone on the board and they don't fit, they don't contribute. And when you're going through a non-exec recruitment, it's a very prescriptive process. They look at existing skills. So if you go into the annual report and accounts of a listed company, they tend to list each board member's skills, sectors, and then you can see where the gaps are. So who do they bring on to fill those gaps? And boards are independently assessed as well, listed companies. So through that sort of process, they're looking for a specific skill set to fill that sort of gap. So it's really the process. It takes a long, long time.
Jason, have you got anything to add? And particularly, I'm going to say around, because Sanjeev said something here, you know, it's a long drawn out process. So is it okay to say no then to the things that are being put to you, or should you be going to every single interview that you possibly can, or meeting with every organisation as possibly you can? What's your advice around that?
So like, I'm a firm believer in saying no if you think it's the wrong thing to do anyway, whether we're talking about Ned or anything in life. I think too many people say yes. Look, part of the reason I haven't gone for PLC is I'm not a big supporter of sitting down and going through all of that. It wasn't what I wanted to do. I'm a fairly entrepreneurial individual. I wanted to pick pre-Series A businesses. It means I get remunerated in a very different way than if I was in a PLC, but I'm okay with that. So I don't have this big drawn out process because in the space that I'm playing, you are networking, because most of the companies, they theoretically understand they will need a chair. They don't know when, they don't know how to do it, and they don't know how to deal with it. So it's all about networking, and actually it's about chemistry. And that applies at any non-exec role at any organization, whether it's an NGO or a PLC as well. But the process is far more, you're meeting with the founders of the business, how you get on, what's the skills gap. So what you're doing is you're doing more due diligence on the company than they are on you. Yeah. So the roles are reversed.
Yeah.
But you're playing in a very different space, and it can happen very quickly. So, you know, my first non-exec role was one conversation, and the second conversation was, we want you to come on board. That was it. Right? You know, it was nothing more complicated than that. But there is one key part that I want to make sure everybody understands when I say that. I have a big network, and I've continued to build that network, foster that network, and support that network. And network is one of the most important things that often organizations or founders need help with from their non-execs. But two, it also holds you in good stead to position you as a non-exec. Yeah. So I'm probably coming at it from a different space than Sanjeev, because I'm playing in a different space.
Yeah.
But I like the innovation. I like the entrepreneurship in that space, and want to help them on their journey to scale up, as opposed to a really big organization and governing it. And that's kind of what I meant when we started, which is you have to decide, what do you want to do? Because there's lots of different things in non-exec as well that you can choose from depending on what your motivations are.
Yeah. That leads on really nicely, because I think it was when we had one of our first conversations, early meetings, Jason, you said that there were many skills that individuals could actually gain from their current employer to help them grow more confidence when they're actually applying for their first NED role. Can you just touch on that and give us a bit more detail?
Yeah, sure. No problem. So look, I think two things I would say. One is everybody in any role, and I used to do this in my own organization and throughout my career, when people want to get promoted, I always used to say, operate at that level before you get promoted. I think that principle holds with non-execs as well, right? You don't finish your executive career and then just go, right, okay, what do I need to do now to become a non-exec? You prepare for it before you start doing it, okay? So that's the kind of underlying principle that I believe in. Most people, as I said, there'll be a lot of people who will be CEOs. There'll be a lot of people who won't be ex-CEOs, might have been part of an executive team. I think all of those people have the opportunity to be a non-exec. But what happens in our careers typically is we start specializing in an area. As your career broadens, you start to get a bit more breadth, but you get exposed to different areas. So I'm going to pick a really simple example. If you're the chief people officer of a business, your focus is all about talent management. Okay. You probably have a good overview of the business. You have a good overview of the people, but you need to understand P&L management. You need to understand sales. You need to understand technology. If you don't understand technology, I don't care what role you're doing. We're in 2024 in technology, and we're in a digital revolution. So bottom line is, I think there's a lot of skills that you can learn within your organization today but you've got to go out there and seek those opportunities. Both Sanjeev and Marnie used the word curiosity. I think curiosity is a great aspect of any executive and non-executive, but it's that curiosity. It says, well, I don't understand P&L management. How am I going to go and do it? Or I don't understand sales and go-to-market strategy. Let me go and spend time with the sales team, do a project within the company, except mentoring, coaching, I think is a core aspect. How many people have actually mentored people? A lot of people say, I want a mentor. How many people actually go out there and try and do the mentoring themselves? So I think there's some really simple things like that you can do. And there's kind of more structured things. But I don't think in any organization I've ever heard from anybody, and I use my own personal experience and others that I've talked to about this, if you say, I want to learn something, most people tend to give you an opportunity. Yeah. The want and desire has to come from you. And I go back to that first principle I said. If you want to go into a non-exec career, you have to start getting ready for it way before you actually do it. And also it gives you a chance of saying, is this something I want to do? Right? You speak to non-execs, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I just am thinking, Marnie and Sanjeev, is there anything advice that you can give us around how do you leverage those existing networks in your sort of internal relationships at work? Because I like the point that you said, you're not that strong on finance. You've got to go and sit with your finance directors or managers and understand and get under the skin of it. But is there anything that you could add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jason's hit on a very important point, is that, even if you sit on a founder-led business, and I'm sort of in the middle space of Jason and Sanjeev, because I have PLC, I have, private equity-backed businesses, and I have founder-led privately owned businesses. So I'm sitting with quite a smorgasbord, so to speak. But I think your ability to be able to pick up a board pack, and yes, you've got an audit committee chair who normally will be from a finance background. You've still got to be able to grasp very, very quickly the financial intricacy of every business. And for example, Finsbury was my first non-exec role, 3,500 people, 12 large production sites, and we were signing capex off of probably £19 million a year. Now I've got to get to grips with what each factory did, where that capex was going, what the return of investment was. So the other thing I would say about your first non-exec role, it's a huge learning curve in terms of even that business, which was a food business, and I've been in food and beverage, nearly 30 years. The intensity of getting to grips with a different business to be able to operate at a non-exec level reasonably quickly is time consuming, and that's something that new incoming non-execs, if you've also got your executive role, and it's very possible to do it, I did it the same as Sanjeev is doing it, but you need to be very, very mindful that you've got to get to grips with the business pretty quickly and to be able to make informed decisions as and when they're required through the financial calendar, because the minute you get to budget and strategy, you are making a contribution to those decisions that the board are taking.
Thank you so much. Sanjeev, I was going to move on actually to what sort of top tips are there when you actually want to apply for the NED position? Because I just thought you might be able to shed some light on what we should be doing.
There's probably a few, and it's going to be different depending on where you are on your own sort of development and sort of journey. So one thing is be clear on your USP. What is it you think you can sort of bring to a board? And clearly you can't be a master of one thing only. You've got to be a jack of all trades, particularly from a listed company sort of perspective. So by that, I mean, for example, I had to learn a lot about governance, corporate governance, the Companies Act, listing rules, Code of Corporate Governance, Section 172. People won't understand these, but you can Google them to your heart's content afterwards. Because when you do get in front of your interview panel, you need to be able to talk as if you know what's sort of entailed. So I think what one is around making sure you're clear on your sort of skill sets and what you bring. And that's both in that listed space plus your own trade skills experience. I also think it's a lot to do with, and it's a dangerous two-edged word here, fit. Because what they don't want is a cuckoo in the nest. Now, companies will say they want disruptors, someone who thinks differently. They don't. Let's be clear. So what they want is someone who will challenge, but at the end of the day, they bring some different way of thinking. What they don't want is someone who's just going to be disrupting every single committee meeting or whatever. So you've got to recognise who are the other people on that sort of board. What are their skill sets? What do they bring? What are their personalities and things like that? So it's a very difficult one until you know the organisation you're looking at. So you just need to be mindful around that. But I also think it is around, and going back to my comment about you have to kiss a lot of frogs, you've got to put the shoe leather in. You've just got to do it. Whether you go to conferences, get your name known out there, make introductions, all of those sort of things. And these sort of events as well, where you can pick up learnings, not necessarily all of it relevant, but the more you get known out there, the better, really.
Yeah, and I think we have our steerco, and that was one of the things that I don't think we're necessarily people of colour great at networking, because we're so consumed with our day jobs. Let's concentrate on that first and then do that second.
Yeah. So I was just going to add as well, the other thing, if you are going to do this and go on this sort of journey, and particularly in a listed company, people look at it like it's the next rise up, if you like. It's great on the CV. Do not do it for the money is the one thing I would sort of say. Fine, listed companies, they pay pretty well, but they take their pound of flesh in that as well. So just be mindful of that.
One thing that you've all touched on is right at the beginning and early doors of this was that your NED roles are in different sectors. So what I wanted to get a bit of an insight is how do they all differ? How does food differ to property? Just so we know, is there any sort of certain skills that they look for that stand out more, or anything like that we should be getting a feel for, or does it not matter at this stage?
Well, I think if I compare University Academy 92, which, whilst it's a privately led enterprise, is still in the public sector. So as chair of that board, we're bound by all the regulatory requirements, exactly if we were Cambridge or Oxford University. So, coming back to Sanjeev's point, Google Internet's a wonderful thing. I can't tell you how many meetings I've been in as CEO, and I've had some fund manager ask a question, and you always go back and sort of ask them to explain a little bit more what they mean, so you find a way of answering it appropriately, but always write it down and then Google what it actually all means, and store that in one's brain for another day, and I have no shame about that. Every day is a learning day. And therefore in a public listed company you have got to know what 172 is. You've got to know why the NOMCO's there, what's the roles and responsibility of a REMCO, an audit, etc. So what's the purpose of the annual report, what are your auditors doing? But that runs as a theme through a public listed company, different from main market to AIM. but you know, lots of rigor there. But I have a different kind of rigor at UA92 because it's an education, and you know, our outcomes are our student outcomes, and we have student satisfaction. So very, very different. So you have to get to grips with that. And then coming back to Jason's point about a founder-led business, you still need the appropriate process and rigor, even with a founder-led business, but not to the extent of a public listed business, or probably what I've got at UA92. So particularly when you're chair of a board, there's a real nuance and a real skill into how you bring process into a board meeting, how you bring board papers in, how you bring committees in that are appropriate without overloading this founder entrepreneur who's just going to say, go away, this is not for me. But as they prepare for their next stage of growth, the likelihood is a large investor will come in who will want rigor and process. They will want to see due diligence. So if you haven't had board meetings and board minutes and actions and, you know, relative board reports, they'll want to know why. And indeed, if you want to IPO, then there will be an IPO ready reckoner list that will be done on you. So, you know, it's finding what's right for each business. And that's why I like different businesses of different types and different sizes, because every day is a different day for me. And I enjoy that diversity of company and thinking every day.
Jason, have you got anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I was smiling when Marnie was saying her last piece, because, you know, I'm in that stage at the moment with two of the businesses, because I know we're going to go for investment in probably 12 months time, and in one of them I did introduce the first board meeting, which was, you know, I'm not going to say anything more than that, but I'll let everybody guess. I think a lot of this is just as much an art as it is a science. Is the way I would describe it. Being adaptable is really important. But kind of going back to that overall question that you asked, Sanjeev, in the first place, for me, it's all about, am I going to add value?
Yeah.
So I get the USP, I get all of those things, and you've got to research. But it was, can I add value? And I also wanted to learn something. So I wanted to learn something new. So I've purposely gone and found certain things that are outside of my comfort zone, because it keeps me going. It's one of my interests. But, you know, I'm also a firm believer that the core pillars of a business and a business model are the same.
Yeah.
Right. And, you know, that experience, often people sometimes narrow themselves and say, oh, but I've only got this sector experience. It's like, well, no, it's your actual wider experience that's valuable. It is different, you know, working with founders isn't for everybody, because it's a very different challenge to the governance challenge that Sanjeev was talking about, where at least the governance is set up and you've got forums. With founders, you are taking their business that they own, but they want to scale, and often telling them that they need to do things that they don't want to do, but this is the reason why. And I think the why is just as important as the what. Yeah. Leave it there.
I like what you said there, because I think that there is a danger that people do panic and then they'll just want to stay in their lane, because that's the sector I know, I'm going to stick with that. So I like the fact that hearing from your introductions, you're in sectors that you haven't worked previously, and I think that's really refreshing to see. I would like to move the conversation on to developing your career as a NED. And the first question I've got around that is, what typically are the time commitments needed to be a NED? And how do you actually balance the NED role with the day job? We've touched on it a little bit, but I really want to understand, what does that mean for the audience, the commitment that they're going to have to put out there? If I could start with Marnie, and then Sanjeev, if you could also add to it.
Yeah, again, there's not a straightforward answer. I mean, when you receive a brief for an NED role, then the time commitment is usually stated. In my experience, the more established business that you join, and potentially in PLC world in particular, the likelihood is those days will be pretty well adhered to in terms of physical presence at board meetings. There's then the preparation and the reading time for those board meetings. So, you know, if I've got a board meeting, as I have next week in UA 92, I mean, I do chair that board, so there's a lot of preparatory work I do with the CEO in terms of the agenda, the content. A board never wants any surprises. So again, I've got a few sticky subjects. So I will also have individual calls with the shareholders and other non-execs, not to preempt an answer or an outcome, but just to make sure everybody is comfortable ahead of the board meeting of those sticky subjects that we're going to discuss and debate. Coming back to Jason's point, it's really important to me that I add value. So, you know, I will choose to do things outside of the board cycle. You know, that could be site visits, it could be mentoring, because the only way you get to understand a wider organisation is by doing some deep dipping into different areas with different people. You're using your intuition and your empathy a lot in a board. You're a statutory director, so it's a very, very responsible role. So it's upon yourself to create the time to do the extracurricular stuff. So, you know, I would say if a job description probably says 15 days, you're probably talking 30 to 35. That's me personally. In some of my founder startup businesses, I'm not there in person, but I could probably be spending just doing a fundraise B, for example, at the moment. I've probably for the last 8 weeks been working on that every day for probably 2 or 3 hours a day.
Wow.
That'll settle down. So it's just making sure as you grow a portfolio that you have a balance of not everybody needing full-time attention. You've got to have mature businesses, well established, and you've also got to look at the board cycle. So in education, it's very, very busy as we do the intakes, and it's very, very busy as we're preparing the budgets in May, June time. Yeah. So again, it's the rhythm of the business that you need to understand to be able to make the commitment. But as a broad brush, I don't know how the other guys feel. I would say whatever time commitment it is, you need to double that at least as a broad brush. Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah, and I was going to say the same. So when I took on my first NED role, I was told 25 days, sort of circa 2 days a month, but you can very easily double it. And just a couple of points. It also depends on how many committees you're sat on. So each committee is sort of penciled in. They tend to run for about 2 to 3 hours. A board session can last half a day, depending. And as Marnie sort of says, this isn't smoothed out over the year. There are peaks and troughs. So particularly with the year ends, as you're coming into year end, AGM results, all of those things, it's probably typically you're very much full on. Board packs, for example, where I am, they range anything from 300 to 700 pages of documents. So the preparation, as Marnie says, you've got to read up. You just can't turn up and not having done the homework. You will be found out pretty quickly. So you've got to do that. The other thing, and particularly on a listed company, is we have our schedule of meetings, committee, board, AGM, strategy days, pretty much all in the corporate calendar for the next 2 years. So we know
Right.
when we've got to turn up. And as Marnie says, and again, if you look in report and accounts, there will be a table which will list every non-exec director and director and their attendance. And the attendance is in person, by the way. It will also note if you've only done remotely. And if you're not turning up, then that's an absolute no-no. So you've got to make that sort of time commitment. For me, because I'm in a full-time job, it has been more difficult, and therefore be very careful in terms of if you're in a full-time job committing to something like that.
Thank you both for being really honest about that. I hope it's not putting people off, though. You know, you see that's 15 hours or days and then you have to double it. But what advice can you give about changing mindset when making that move from being a successful exec director into a non-exec role at the boardroom? So Marnie, could you take that one for me, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does very much come back to what we were saying earlier, is really getting your head around the transition from executive, where you're doing, to non-executive, where you're advising, you're counselling, you're critiquing appropriately and respectfully, and being able to sit very, very comfortably with that. I think also, if anyone transitions to a full portfolio, it's also bearing in mind the mindset that there may be one period in the year where you might have the equivalent of a crisis or an event in every single business you've got, and that did happen to me pre-Christmas. And I remember my husband saying to me, I didn't think you were supposed to be doing this kind of stuff anymore. Now you're not an executive, because it comes with the executive territory. So you just, that mindset that actually my teams are very, very respectful, knowing I have multiple roles. So, you know, we've got lots of great WhatsApp groups, and if they want to speak to me, they'll say, Marnie, are you free? And without a shadow of a doubt, I will be back to them that day with the hour that I'm going to speak to them, and that's my commitment. But you are effectively available 24/7. You know, if something happens in your public limited world, you are. I'm sure Jason, you know, if something's happening in those founder-led business. So it's I know it's, you know, executives will say it's 24/7 for me. Actually, you know, this is truly, and you know, therefore your flexibility and your adaptability. I didn't do it to go on the golf course. One, I can't play golf, but this is full time for me. This is my job now, and I absolutely love it. So I don't want people to be put off, because it's a brilliant, you know, when you get a team and you can see them grow and you know you're adding value, it's a very, very privileged place to be. But you are effectively on call. That is why you're there. You are the backstop. You're the wise owl, as they call me, when they're really mulling something over and they think, I'm a bit like phone a friend. Who wants to be right? We'll phone Marnie now, and I like that. I mean, I you know, I like the challenges. I like the conundrums, and I really enjoy the people I work with. I like working with, and I think Jason hit on that. Reason I haven't done some 250 listed businesses, it'd be brilliant on my CV, but I just thought, no, these boards are not for me. These people are not for me. I'm at a stage now where I like who I work with, and that's a wonderful choice to have.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Now, I've just spotted the time, so I'm going to go to my final question, and if you could each sort of answer it really, really briefly, because I want to go to the audience and see if we've got any questions there. So, what is your one top tip to the audience for getting their first NED role? Marnie, you start.
Yeah, I think one, you do need to work hard with headhunters. Even if you don't go down the headhunter route for a PLC, they're really good at giving you feedback on your CV, thinking about yourself, how you're going to present yourself, but work on your network. Work on your network. Other than one role, everything for me has come from my network.
Love that. Sanjeev?
I was going to talk about perseverance. Keep going, because you will get knockbacks, but don't let that stop you. Because if I go back to when I was 21 coming out of university, I was green, and I could understand why people weren't giving me a job. But now, X many years later, with all this knowledge and everything else, actually no one comes necessarily knocking at your door. So you sort of feel, well, hang on a minute, they should be, because I've got X, Y, Z, but you need to persevere. So don't expect people will just knock on the door. So just make sure you're very focused and targeted as to what you're looking for. Sectors, type of roles, profit, non-profit, all of that.
Perfect. And finally, Jason.
Yeah, look, put yourself out there. That's what I would describe it, whether that's networking, whether that's changing your mindset, because, you know, people don't come with a silver tray. I don't think they ever have in my life. So, you know, you've got to put yourself out there. You've got to be committed. You've got to have resilience, but also have fun. One thing that I just wanted to finish with is there's a lot of time commitment on the actual role. There's also a lot of time commitment on keeping yourself current and going through. So, you know, I spend a lot of time with private equity and VC. I spend a lot of time with the banks. You know, that's good for my businesses. That's also good for me. So have some fun. It is fun and it is enjoyable. Yeah.
That's a great note to end on. Aaron and Catherine, have we got any questions? Are they there?
Hi, Joe. Yes, we have. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. We're in the room with some of our steerco here. Hello.
Hi.
So a couple of questions. And so one from Jastin. Who did you see around the board table when you first became a NED? Then added to that, how has that changed over the time that you've been a NED?
Sorry, I missed the first part of the question.
The question was, who did you see around the board table when you first became a NED? And how has that changed, if at all?
Right.
From my sort of perspective, in terms of who did I see, the board I'm on, and this comes back to something Jason talked about, was actually a very diverse board in terms of skills and gender. So someone very senior from JP Morgan, a CEO of another FTSE company, someone who's an ex-FD of a FTSE 100 company, someone who's on probably 2 or 3 of the biggest FTSE 100, and this was a huge learning experience. So actually what I thought was, God, am I on the right table almost? So you begin to doubt yourself, this imposter syndrome, but actually you get onto it pretty quickly. So don't let that sort of phase you, because you've got to start somewhere. So my experience was probably a little bit different because it was a listed sort of company. So.
Would anybody else like to add to that? No? No? Okay, any other questions, Aaron or Catherine?
One of the things that the team around the table are keen to know is, do you enjoy being an ed in your current positions?
This is recorded.
Or should we put it a different way? Would you advise people to become NEDs? I think that's probably in their current organisations.
Yeah, if I go first, I absolutely love it because I'm learning things in areas sometimes I can contribute in and others which I can't. But it's an organisation which has good people around it, very knowledgeable. They know more than me in certain areas. So, for example, I'm not an accountant, but I sit on the audit committee. And what I learn about the P&L, the balance sheet, things like that, it helps me then coming back to your question, Marnie, earlier about transferable skills. Actually, it's not transferred from my current job to the non-exec. It's the other way as well, bringing it back. So it's sort of both ways. But yeah, I wouldn't change my mind. I'm absolutely loving it, even with the time commitments. No regrets.
Marnie, would you like to?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm UA 92. We're taking young people who never thought university was for them. We're working with kids from postcodes that, you know, it just doesn't even it's not whether they're first generation going to university. It's just, you know, I'm not encouraged to. So on graduation day, when I stand up as chair of the board and our first 72 graduates, you know, 2 years ago, and I've got it's interesting, it's grandparents predominantly that come and say to me, Marnie, you know, you've changed, or UA 92, I have changed this person's life, young person's life. And then I'm on a call and they're sitting in KPMG and they wouldn't have been there because their A-level results weren't good enough, but they got a first, and they're now sitting in KPMG looking at me doing a great job. Then yeah, I mean, it's fabulous. And also places like Finsbury, where we took that private in November, and that whole executive team now I've helped mentor and come through. I was with them for nearly 8 years, coming up to my 9th year. And therefore, to see that team absolutely capable of supporting the CEO in a new part of their journey and with a new investor, yeah, I mean, it's yeah, great place, a great job. Thank you.
Jason, would you like to add to that final question?
Yeah, look, I mean, I absolutely love what I'm doing. We're innovating, as I said, AI in grills, all the way to using technology and artificial intelligence to improve an integrated healthcare system, which is, you know, it's a really quite meaningful thing to do. You know, do I have days where I think, oh my God, I put my head in my hands? I do, but I've had that in every job I've done. Yeah. Right? This is no different. But I really enjoy, for me, and the reason I'm playing the space I'm playing is taking new ideas and new services and scaling them to a wider audience. I get a buzz out of that. I get a buzz out of watching that team achieve that, watching the team grow. And I'm quite happy being a backseat driver, or whatever term you want to call it, because actually it's just as rewarding. And I think that was part of the reason I said earlier on, you know, do mentoring and coaching, because actually if you do mentoring, you do coaching, you find those same rewards. And if you do, it's probably a good indicator that you'll enjoy being a non-exec. If you don't, equally, it's probably a good indicator that you won't enjoy a non-exec career. So I think for all of those reasons, I enjoy it. And, you know, listening to them come and tell you their success stories, it's really rewarding. You know, I'm not sure what else, other words to use, but it's a nice way to spend your life, is the way I would describe it. Yeah.
I think that's great. Thank you so much. Well, it's now about 6:02, so our session has come to an end, which is a bit unfortunate, but I would like to really thank the panel and actually you, the audience, for attending this evening. And if you have any further questions for the panel, then please don't hesitate to contact myself, Catherine or Aaron, and we can forward you and connect you and get you in touch with them. If that's okay still with the panel, you're all right to do that and give some advice on a one-on-one basis. That would be greatly appreciated. We're also going to be sending out some information to you, just asking a little bit more for feedback on how you found the session today. And also we'll be sending some information about some other things that we have on offer to help you on your way to getting the ideal NED position. So thank you once again for your time and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Bye-bye.
Thank you, bye.
Bye.